Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett. Tonight on America Decides, politics and the papacy. Pope Francis remembered as, yes, a spiritual and political leader. The Catholic Church today, a sturdy institution to be sure, had a different tone in the 12 years of Pope Francis's leadership, notably in his opposition to what he perceived to be far-right policies and his more liberal stances on social issues, such as immigration and gay rights. Millions of Catholics around the world now reflecting on this legacy. One of the last people to meet with the Pope before his death, Vice President J.D. Vance. Tonight, the White House flying the American flag at half-staff, and President Trump says he and the First Lady will attend the Pope's funeral in Rome. Also in Washington, signal again. The White House standing by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He is accused of using his personal phone again to send information about operations in Yemen to a Signal group chat. Among those on that chat, his wife and brother. I want to start tonight with Francis Rocca in Rome. He is a senior Vatican analyst at EWTN News and is a CBS News papal contributor. It's great to have you with us. What is the atmosphere there, the mood tonight?
Well, it's sad. There was a bit of shock because we saw the Pope only yesterday circulating through St. Peter's Square in his Popemobile. He didn't look well, but he looked like he was getting better than he had been. He'd been in the hospital, and suddenly the next morning he's gone. So there's a bit of shock, and there's also sadness. Pope Francis, even inside the Vatican, was a kind of a lone wolf, as one cardinal called him. He wasn't close to people that way, so perhaps there's not, the sadness is a more distant, remote feeling, but there's great admiration and a sense that a period is over.
And that is kind of consistent with his papacy, not necessarily integrated within the Vatican and the cardinals, but he wanted, at least symbolically, to be closer to the people. And that's how he spent the last days of his life.
Yes, that's right. I mean, a lot of people were puzzled because his doctors had told him when he left the hospital last month, you must spend at least 2 months in convalescence. You must avoid groups of people. You must avoid children. And he almost immediately went about flouting all those orders. And so people wondered, does he want to risk an infection and finish himself off? But it may have been that he decided he was reaching the end and he wanted to be with the people. And he certainly was. He made a number of surprise appearances around the Vatican and met large groups of people, and then met J.D. Vance in his last hours.
And what do we know about the timeline for events to come, including the conclave for the successor?
Well, tomorrow, Tuesday, the cardinals meet for the first time in what's called the general congregations. And they'll make some decisions, including, for example, when the Pope's body, the late Pope's body, will lie in state in St. Peter's Basilica, which will probably be on Wednesday. And they'll probably decide on the funeral pretty quickly. It's supposed to be between 4 and 6 days after the death of the Pope. So it could possibly be, for example, this Saturday.
Francis Rocca in Rome, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Virginia Democratic Senator Tim Kaine joins me now. Senator, as many people know, and those who don't know, you're Catholic. You care about your Catholicism very much. Your immediate reaction on this emotional day for Catholics worldwide?
Well, Major, I was so sad when I heard the news, but also just really celebrate a wonderful man, a wonderful leader, and just marvel at his life of service and the way he served with compassion and humility up to his last minutes, you know, ministering to prisoners on Holy Thursday, that time in Holy Week where the priest washes the feet of congregants in a gesture of service and humility, being in St. Peter's Square yesterday to celebrate with people who were so excited to see him, his powerful last sermon. What a beautiful leader for a church that needed someone just like him at this moment in time.
Do you think, Senator, his papacy illustrates the kind of internal conflict in global Catholicism? Catholicism is a powerful institution, and it exerts lots of power, intimately in local politics and externally in global politics. And yet he tried to take the message of Catholicism down to the people who were disfavored, who were marginalized, who were most harmed by the excesses of the world. That seems to be an illustration of these two things that live in sort of constant conflict.
Major, you're right. I mean, I'm 67 years old. Of the popes that have been during my lifetime. He stands out as the one who really put compassion first, and also one who really put humility first in a very unusual way. You know, he used to really challenge church leaders, all leaders, saying that in a funny phrase, he said, you need to smell like the flock. If you elevate yourselves above those you want to serve, or if you use your title to distance or separate yourself from those who you want to serve, you're not a leader. And he exemplified that over and over and over again. And I think that's a challenge that goes far beyond our church, and it's for believers and non-believers, people all over the world. We're all leaders in our own way. It might be in a family or in a PTA or in a neighborhood council. And what he was telling all of us is to be a leader, you have to be connected one to another.
Thinking about the Pope and Catholicism in America, as I look at the statistics, 19% of our population call themselves Catholic. That's about 53 million. In the most recent election, President Trump carried Catholics, according to the exit polls, 55% to 44%. And the Wall Street Journal had an article that caught my eye about conservative Catholicism growing in America as a sort of cultural reaction to not just Pope Francis, but a sense since Vatican II of a kind of liberalism spreading through American Catholicism. What is your evaluation of those things I just summarized?
I don't challenge those, Major. You know, Catholic means universal. So small c Catholic means universal. And so any trend in politics or society, you're going to see in the Catholic Church. In fact, I'll tell you something I love about being a Catholic. Where do we go in our lives now where when you drive into the parking lot, you see bumper stickers of all political persuasions? That's who we are as Catholics. And different parishes might be, you know, a little bit more liberal. Mine probably is. Mine is a heavily immigrant parish. Other parishes might be more conservative. But you drive through a parking lot at most Catholic masses, and you're going to see bumper stickers from every part of the political or social spectrum. We don't have enough parts of our society where we come together despite differences to think about something other than our differences, but to think about what we have in common. And so I think the things you say are accurate, but maybe I'd look at it the other direction, which is, yeah, we're a divided society, but at Mass on Sunday, despite our differences, we still sit next to one another, accept communion together, and exchange greetings during the Kiss of Peace.
You mentioned Holy Weekend, and there was kind of an interesting juxtaposition of what the U.S. Embassy in the Vatican said on social media, talking about national sovereignty and curbing illegal immigration, and the Vatican putting out a statement talking under the voice of Pope Francis that there was an effort to stir up contempt for migrants, and all of this sort of flows through something that Vice President Vance, who saw the Pope just before he passed, talking about a hierarchy of love, that you love your family, you love your neighbors, you love your citizens of your country, then you make time to love an outsider. And that's been evaluated from lots of different theological perspectives, but it flows through the immigration conversation that is very prevalent, not just in our pews, but in our politics right now. Evaluate all of that I just described.
Well, it does. But, you know, it brings to mind the great gospel lesson that the Pope referred to, the Good Samaritan. Who is your neighbor? And in the story of the Good Samaritan, when Jesus tells the story and the lawyer who asks the question, who is my neighbor, gets asked by Jesus, so who was a good neighbor to the one who was beaten on the road to Jericho? It's interesting. The lawyer can't say the word the Good Samaritan because Samaritans were outsiders. They were despised. But the lawyer knows enough to say the one who showed him mercy. He couldn't admit that the outsider was actually the good neighbor. But the message that Jesus was conveying in the parable was that neighbor extends beyond your next door neighbor, and it really encompasses all of humanity.
Would you say you agree or disagree fundamentally with the Vice President's explication of a hierarchy of love?
I don't really want to get into a test of words with the Vice President over this, but I think the Good Samaritan message, if you embrace it, no one's required to embrace it, But if you embrace it, the power in that message is that our neighbors are not just those near to us, but we have to have hearts of compassion for all. This is so difficult to do, obviously. And the Pope knew this. I met with the Pope once and we talked about refugees in Rome, and we talked in Spanish. I was at one of his audiences and I'm fluent in Spanish. So we started to talk about refugees in Spanish. And at the end of our little conversation, which lasted about 5 minutes, he switched to English and just said, "Pray for me." And I think the reason he said that, I had the strong feeling that what he was saying is, Senator, you've got some responsibilities on your shoulders, but I've got even tougher ones on mine. I'm trying to preach a message of hope in a world of despair. I'm trying to preach a message of love in a world where there's hatred. I'm trying to preach a message of acceptance where there's too many things that divide us. I'm not sure I'm up to it. I'm not sure we're up to it, but maybe if we pray for each other, we can be up to it. This is not an easy thing to do, what the Pope is asking of himself and asking of us. But if we do our best and pray for each other, maybe we could get there.
Senator Tim Kaine, always a pleasure, sir. I thank you.
Major, thanks so much.
Finn Gomez joins me now. Finn, we have the news about the Pope's passing. We have Pete Hegseth under more scrutiny at the Pentagon, but we also had a sizable amount of economic news today, at least in terms of the markets. All three major indices down by more than 2%. Those losses accelerated after the President of the United States posted on Truth Social more criticism of Fed Chair Jerome Powell, calling him a major loser. Just as a digression, ladies and gentlemen, we on this show frown on any political figure using major to modify loser in any context, but setting that aside, the markets did not embrace that. No. They were rattled by that, which continues a sort of pattern of the president to create wounds that only he puts in motion.
That's right. His detractors would say that they are completely self-inflicted, right? And as you said, the president took to Truth Social this morning, just after the markets opened on this Easter Monday morning, and attacked the Fed chair. We've seen these attacks from the president towards Jerome Powell over the last week, but we saw the market impact, calling him a major loser, Mr. Too Late, and calling for him to lower interest rates, quote, now. And of course, now is capitalized major, as you know. But just after that, the markets tumbled more than 1,200 points by the end.
They clawed back some of the gains late in the session, right, but still way down, more than 2% for all three.
That's right. That's right.
Very quickly, the White House standing by Pete Hegseth as defense secretary, even though there's been turmoil within the Pentagon senior leadership ranks, and another episode of talking about military plans on this unsecured commercial app known as Signal.
That's absolutely right. We do know, Major, we have reported, James Laporta and myself and some others, that yes, there is another incident now where the Secretary of Defense has included some sensitive information related to this Houthi attack to not only his wife and his brother, but also his longtime personal lawyer. Some questions as to why they're on this kind of chat space and the kind of information.
And why would they receive this kind of information?
Exactly. So there's a lot of questions about that swirling around that. Of course, the Secretary of Defense asked about this at the Easter egg roll earlier today. Called it fake news, a familiar refrain that we hear from him and from others in the cabinet.
Finn Gomez, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Major. As
we just mentioned, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth very much under scrutiny again amid accusations of a second private chat sharing high-level military information on Signal. How the White House is responding. More on that right here on America Decides.
This is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people.
That is Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. The location there, the White House South Lawn. Today was the Easter egg roll day. That's why you heard the music, saw the little picket fence behind there and all that other stuff. This following allegations that, for a second time, the Defense Secretary shared details of an impending airstrike on a Signal group chat. Among those on that chat, his wife, brother, and personal lawyer. President Trump, not upset. Listen.
It's all Just the same old stuff from the media. That's an old one. Try finding something new.
James Laporta joins me now, and Barbara Starr joins me. Barbara is a longtime Pentagon correspondent, currently a senior fellow with the University of California's Annenberg Center on Communication Leadership. James, of course, national security coordinating producer for CBS News. James, what do we know about this? And just to piggyback off what the president said, it is new, actually.
Right.
The second story, and it's very new, just to remind the audience, for any defense secretary to share any information of this sensitivity on Signal, an unsecured commercial app. So it is new.
Right. So the first time around with the Atlantic story was you had the principals involved that you would typically see in airstrikes involving the Houthis.
Secretary of State, National Security Advisor,
That's right.
CIA,
Right.
Director of National Intelligence.
And their subordinates. And those are typically, so other than Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic, those are typically people you would see involved in those kind of
Those would be
airstrikes.
people read in on this.
Correct. Not typically on Signal,
no,
but they would be involved. This Signal chat is different. We have individuals who are not Defense Department employees. Pete Hegseth's wife, who's a former Fox News producer. To our knowledge, she has no security clearance and does not work at the Department of Defense. Pete Hegseth's brother and his attorney, they are Department of Defense employees, but arguably, you have to question why would they be involved in conversations like that. But again, this is all happening over Signal. These conversations shouldn't be happening. If you talk to military professionals, people in the IC, these are conversations that are more suited for the classified side of the house, what we call the high side or JWICs. You would have these conversations over top secret
and highly secure communications,
what we call SCIFs.
Right.
You would not be doing this over Signal.
And briefly, for the audience's benefit, what did he talk to or share about?
He shared
Signal.
He shared similar information about these FA-18s. Hornets are going to be involved in the strike at this time and place. Similar information that was shared that we saw, come out from the Atlantic story.
And to your experience and your previous reporting, had someone of lesser rank in the intelligence community or the military done this, what would have happened?
Oh, they'd have the book thrown at them. They'd be court-martialed. They'd be administratively separated. They would, regardless if the information is classified or not, there's no dispute amongst people that I've talked to that it's a violation of operational security and it's a violation of the cybersecurity policies. You're just simply not allowed to use Signal for these type of communications. And if it was a private, if it was a sergeant, if it was a high-ranking field grade officer, they'd be in trouble.
Barbara, there's also something else that's been going on at the Pentagon for the last couple of weeks. And John Elliott, who used to be an employee at the Pentagon, a high-ranking person brought there by Pete Hegseth, has since been separated, wrote a scathing op-ed in Politico saying that there is a sort of meltdown going on at the senior ranks of the Pentagon, and it's disserving the president.
It's a lot of drama. It's a lot of political drama. We see this in Washington, but let me make 2 points. Not to this scale. We have something like 5 senior aides that Hegseth brought in himself, now out the door. So that says something perhaps about his judgment about who he wanted to hire. But I think the deeper issue, even beyond the Washington political drama, is why does it matter? Why should the average American actually care about all this? And it is because it threatens national security. Hypothetical, but what if the Chinese got a hold and were able to crack into Hegseth's own personal phone, which he used in this case, and what if they were able to crack into Signal and download and look at his messages? That's why it matters. It's a lack of judgment. It's a Secretary of Defense who should know better. He served in the U.S. military. And there doesn't seem to be an immediate interest by President Trump to replace him. And I emphasize immediate. I circle back now to Washington drama. We've all been through these scandals. I think it's a fair bet that Hegseth could face the possibility, let me caveat, of potentially not serving out a full term.
And you spent years at the Pentagon. I was there in the lead up to and the 6 months after the Iraq War. One of the things I picked up there is this continuity of leadership, continuity of communication, and trust and reliability in the senior ranks. It seems to me that, at minimum, is a bit up for grabs right now under this current leadership.
Trust and reliability in the senior ranks, absolutely. Trust by Congress, trust by America's allies, trust by other defense ministers around the world that he needs to deal with, that he may want to have conversations with. Are they now going to be worried, as perhaps they should be, that their confidential conversations with Pete Hegseth are going to wind up in a signal chat on his own personal phone, possibly for the Chinese or any hacker to get into? These are the real questions. I think the fundamental question for the White House, does Pete Hegseth tonight still have credibility on the international stage, and does he have credibility with Congress, especially with the Republicans? Yes, with most of them, many of them, but you're beginning to see some cracks in that credibility, and that's where, cliche, the rubber's going to hit the road for him.
Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker, call your office. Barbara Starr, James Laporta, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Florida's welfare assistance project, spearheaded by Casey DeSantis, is under new scrutiny. Why a $10 million donation did not go to those in need. Plus, more Democrats travel to El Salvador seeking the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We are tracking the latest on that story right here on America Decides. Welcome back. 4 House Democrats arrived in El Salvador today to push for the return, first the release, then the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Maryland man, you've heard about him a lot, mistakenly deported. That's what the Trump administration admitted in court from the United States to El Salvador. I want to bring in our panel, our reporter panel. Sabrina Rodriguez, national politics reporter for the Washington Post. Stephanie Lai, White House and politics reporter for Bloomberg. Under the broad terminology of immigration policy, I want to play for you something that Tom Homan, the immigration czar for this White House, said on ABC's This Week yesterday. Listen.
The length of due process is not the same under the Alien Enemies Act. That's why the Alien Enemies Act was created. President Trump invoked the authorities he had of the Alien Enemies Act, an act written and passed by Congress and signed by a president. We're using the laws on the books.
Signed by President John Adams. John Adams, 1798, okay? So just remember that's the context for the Alien Enemies Act. It is one of the remaining few elements of the Alien and Sedition Acts, most of which were repealed very shortly after they were signed by President John Adams, that remains. So these are ancient legal authorities. Holman is right. There are legal authorities, but they've been invoked under much more strenuous, terrifying, wartime circumstances than exist now. But that's what the administration is arguing, that they're following the law.
They are, and that they're arguing that, and that's what they've been saying for weeks. But it's interesting because when this case initially started getting attention, it was because the administration admit to making a mistake. And what we have seen is that as it has gotten more media attention, as it has gotten, you know, more focus from constitutional lawyers that are weighing in on this case, when we're hearing attention, the Supreme Court weighing in on this. Now what we have seen is the Trump administration doubling down and, you know, claiming that he is a gang member when you know, we've seen federal judges say the Justice Department has provided no proof of that.
No evidence of that, right. You keep asserting it. We just keep asking for the evidence for it.
Yeah, and it's become this sort of messaging war where now as Democrats are being more vocal and pushing for the release and return of this man, you're hearing the Trump administration come out even more forcefully and say, no, but he is because we say he is, without providing, obviously, key evidence here.
And Stephanie, the larger question here, both politically and legally, is this representative of a larger struggle over the future of due process in this country?
I certainly think that House Democrats are trying to make that point when they make this
certainly Senate Democrats like Chris Van Hollen, who was the first one down there. Yeah.
Right. And I think one of the most remarkable things that we're seeing between the first Trump term and now is, as you note, you know, they are coming prepared with this sense of we know what the law says. We can hearken back to John Adams' presidency and tell you that we can do this, that this is fully legal. And so that's just one instance that really sheds light on the fact that the administration this time around has come with 4 years of preparation between the last time they were in office and now.
To test what the law actually means. They have their interpretation, and they're willing to push it up against any previous interpretation. We had on this program last week David Hogg, and I had a long conversation about what his intentions are with this pact with $20 million to unseat through the primary process asleep at the wheel Democrats. You might have noticed that he didn't name any, but it created quite a stir. He has created quite a stir. Here's what Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, said sort of in reaction to that. Let's listen.
Well, I look forward to standing behind every single Democratic incumbent, from the most progressive to the most centrist and all points in between. I'm going to really focus on trying to defeat Republican incumbents so we can take back control of the House of Representatives.
Stephanie, your reaction?
I think one thing that we learned from the 2024 election was that it seems like in many ways the American public is moving towards the middle. And so Jeffries calling back on this and saying he's here to support incumbents sort of gets to that point that they're not looking to push the boundaries, that there's a lot of Americans that rejected the progressive wing in the 2024 election and are sort of moving more to the right. And so there is a very big risk politically when you allow and sort of incentivize more progressive candidates to run, you know, if the balance of the House majority hangs in the wings for that.
Sabrina, I promise I'm going to get to you, but one other thing for Stephanie, I want to play for you. Austin Goolsbee, a member of the Federal Reserve Board, talking about the independence of the Federal Reserve on Face the Nation yesterday.
There's virtual unanimity among economists that monetary independence from political interference, that the Fed or any central bank be able to do the job that it needs to do, is really important. I strongly hope that we do not move ourselves into an environment where monetary independence is questioned, because that would undermine the credibility of the Fed.
And Stephanie, the markets were wobbly again today, and they got wobblier after seeing the president on social media again denounce the Fed Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell.
Right, the S&P ended the day 2.4% lower. Obviously, that is in reaction to his comments about Powell. This is just injecting more uncertainty to the market at a time where there is plenty of reason to be uncertain about where the administration is moving and where people can reliably put their stocks.
Sabrina, I have to apologize. They keep telling me we got to go. I want to come back to you. It's my fault. Blame me.
Next time.
But please come back. And Stephanie Lai, thanks so very much. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis under increased scrutiny over millions of dollars supposed to be used to help struggling families, instead diverted to political committees set up to help the governor further his political agenda. CBS News has learned that $10 million meant for taxpayers was instead sent to the Hope Florida Foundation, a nonprofit originally created to support First Lady Casey DeSantis' signature program, which was called Hope Florida. Part of this money was put toward Governor DeSantis' successful political fight against the constitutional amendment that would have legalized recreational marijuana in Florida. CBS News Miami investigative reporter Jim DeFede joins me now. Jim, I'm always happy to see you. You are so dialed in on so many things in Florida. This story has some complexities to it, so gently, if you'd be so kind, walk our audience through the complexities and the questions.
All right, so here's what I can basically say is that the state of Florida learned that they were being overbilled for Medicaid and that they were owed $67 million. And the Ron DeSantis administration told that company, okay, return $57 million to the Florida taxpayers and send $10 million to the Hope Florida Foundation. Now, under state rules and laws, you are supposed to reveal any details of a settlement with a company that you're returning money to the state of Florida to. They never reported the $10 million to Hope Florida Foundation. That came out later. From there, within days of the money going into the Hope Florida Foundation, a nonprofit, the money was then diverted to two political committees that then transferred the money to a third political committee, Keep Florida Clean, which was being run by then Governor Ron DeSantis' chief of staff, James Uthmeyer, who today is the sitting attorney general in Florida. And they used that money, it is believed, to fight the marijuana initiative. So to put it as succinctly as possible, money that should have been returned to taxpayers ended up in a political action committee controlled and designated by the governor to fight a political campaign.
Jim, that was brilliant and succinct. Is it, under Florida law, illegal or unethical, either one? What you just described.
That's a really interesting question, and the state house has been holding hearings. Nobody is willing to go as far as to say there's criminality for sure, but in speaking to the chairman of the committee that's investigating this, a Republican chairman, mind you, he does say that the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Florida should look into this because this was Medicare dollars, partly federal dollars that should have been returned to the state of Florida and were not. And there's a larger question here, too. Now, the governor has failed to actually address any of these issues. Hope Florida was the signature program by Casey DeSantis. And as you know, there's been a lot of speculation that Casey DeSantis wants to run for governor. And she was going to use her work with Hope Florida as the springboard, the launching pad to say, look at the good work I've done during my term as First Lady. I should be governor. Now, she hasn't declared, but there are people who think that she will. And she was going to use Hope Florida. That raises then the question of what does Hope Florida really accomplish? Hope Florida and the First Lady claim that 30,000 Floridians have been moved off of welfare to being helped by private charities and religious groups. However, they haven't provided any support for any of that. In fact, the chair of the committee that I interviewed, a Republican from Pensacola, Alex Andrade, makes clear that there is no metrics by which they've been able to ascertain whether Hope Florida has actually worked. I think we have some of that sound. We can play it for you now.
I could not tell you if Hope Florida, the operational arm, has done anything to assist Florida families beyond what state employees were supposed to already be doing. I was shocked to find out this week that other than this $10 million in illicit money they received, they'd only raised about $2 million so far in their entire existence, and they'd only written $500,000 worth of grants.
Now, I'll tell you that Andrade, the state representative you just saw, is planning on holding several hours of new hearings this week and is threatening to even issue subpoenas to the now Attorney General if he needs him to testify if he won't come in voluntarily.
That phrase, illicit money, is probably going to ricochet around Tallahassee and other parts of Florida. Jim DeFede, as always, I thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Catholic cardinals in America will help choose who will become the next pope. I'll speak to someone with a vote next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back. In the globe, meaning worldwide, the Pope is a significant figure. For Catholics, a deeply emotional, important leadership figure. And the Catholic Church and eligible cardinals, of course, now must decide who will succeed Pope Francis, who passed away early this morning. Only cardinals under the age of 80 can vote for the next pontiff. 135 are eligible to be part of what is known as a conclave. In a little over 2 weeks, give or take, those members, those cardinals, will isolate themselves in the Sistine Chapel and start discussions and cast ballots. Cardinal Cupich will be part of that selection process. He is also the Archbishop of Chicago. Cardinal, I'm very glad to have you with us. Yes, there's a movie about it. There's lots of political intrigue, but I don't want to skip over or in any way minimize the reverential, holy part of this process. It is a divine mission those cardinals, yourself included, will be on in the not-too-distant future, correct?
Well, thank you, Major, for having me. Yes, exactly. We're going to, as Pope Francis has insisted for all activity in the Church, discern the movement of the Holy Spirit as we go forward. And I think that there will be a very important aspect of our proceedings.
I want to play for you sound from Norah O'Donnell's very memorable interview with the pontiff when she asked an important question that now hovers over this moment in history. Let's listen.
What do you hope your legacy is?
I never really thought about it. The Church is the legacy. The Church not only through the Pope, but through you, through every Christian, through everyone. Personally, I get on the bandwagon of the Church and its legacy for all.
All right, Cardinal Cupich, what would you say in answer to that question? What is the legacy of Pope Francis?
I can't do any better than the Pope himself. He really was a churchman, and he believed that, in fact, when everyone participates in the life of the Church, we're much better off, because that is what Jesus wanted in the first place. He called us to be a synodal church, that is, we walk together. If you notice how he made appointments of people in strategic places in the Vatican, it's the first time we've had a non-cleric, in fact, a woman as a governor of Vatican City. We have a woman who's a head of the dicastery for religious. He placed women in other positions as well, and lay people. So he wanted to make sure that there was an inclusivity within the governance of the church, but also a way in which we called on the gifts and talents of people to help us discern where the Lord's going, where the Lord is taking us. So I think the response he gave was really right on target.
Cardinal Cupich, how would you describe Pope Francis's relationship to Catholicism in America? Not too long ago, he talked about an organized reactionary attitude of opposition from some Catholics in America. And to what extent do you think that relationship, whatever it was, will inform American Catholics as they consider the next pope?
Well, I think that, as I have always said before, there are people always who have disagreed with the Pope, whoever it was, on various points. And I think that the folks that the Holy Father was referring to are loud, but they're not large. And the vast majority of Catholics that I know, here, especially here in Chicago, mourn the loss of this great man and also have a great affection for him and like the direction that he was moving the church in, to be a field hospital in the world, for leaders of the church to know the smell of the sheep. Those images that he used to, in many ways, create a new imagination of who we could be as a church and what leaders should be doing, I think we're in tune with a lot of people, the vast majority of folks that I minister to here in Chicago.
Cardinal Cupich, when the Pope is buried, it will be in a wooden coffin, not another coffin and another one, as is typical for popes. There will not be an elevated platform upon which that coffin will reside. What do those both symbolically and literally mean for the faithful?
Well, I think that it is representative of how he always tried to live a simple and authentically human life. As I told people before, he was serious about important questions, but he never took himself seriously. And he always tried to live an authentic human life, realizing the limitations that we all have as human beings, and yet at the same time making sure that however we look upon leaders in the life of the church, we don't deify them. We don't in any way have an approach that separates them from the rest of humanity. So he wanted to let people know that he was a fellow pilgrim who accompanied them along the way of life.
At this time of mourning and reflection, Cardinal Cupich, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
The papacy and American presidents. He may not have always agreed with their policies, but Pope Francis met with 3 America's previous presidents, including President Trump. We'll have more on that and the relationship between Catholicism and politics in America right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks for staying with us. A new piece in the Wall Street Journal examined the relationship between Catholicism and the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. I want to bring in one of its authors. I'm glad he's here. Wall Street Journal reporter and editor Aaron Zitner. Aaron, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
You're familiar with this, but my audience isn't, so I want to read it to you. Under the headline in your piece, which talks about a resurgence in the MAGA era of conservative Catholicism, because we were just talking to Cardinal Cupich from Chicago about this process of choosing the next pope. Quote, "Whoever occupies the papal seat after Francis will be shepherding an American flock that is increasingly enamored of practices from an ancient, unreformed Catholicism. The most striking may be the traditional Latin Mass, codified in the late 1500s and practiced into the 1960s, and which Francis has discouraged." What's going on in American Catholicism?
Well, it's interesting. Wherever you see vitality or growth on the American religious landscape, you want to pay attention to it, because overall, over the decades, there's been disaffiliation from churches and houses of worship. It might have stabilized, but there aren't a lot of places where there's vitality and growth. And in this conservative strain of Catholicism, it does seem like there is growth. It's hard to get hard numbers. There are maybe 17,000 parishes in this country, give or take. And the number that are traditionally practicing, regularly, the traditional Latin Mass is in the hundreds, maybe the high hundreds. So keeping it in perspective. But it does seem like this is where there's growth. There's where there's influencers, there's social media presence, and there's vitality.
And J.D. Vance, the sitting vice president, is kind of an exemplar of this, is he not?
That's right. And this has a presence in the White House and in American government policy right now.
And also from the article, and I mentioned this to Cardinal Cupich a moment ago, in 2023, Pope Francis complained of a very strong, organized, reactionary attitude against him in the U.S. church, adding, "I would like to remind these people that backwardness is useless." How do you think the death of Pope Francis will influence this vitality on the conservative Catholicism side and maybe the part of Catholicism in America that is either sympathetic to or was enamored of Pope Francis?
Well, my guess is that this conservative strain of Catholicism will continue to grow. We might ask, why is this happening? Well, part of it is spiritual and aesthetic. To listen to the traditional Latin Mass is to be connected to something that goes back to the Council of Trent. Over the centuries, the majesty of the church, the incense, the organ, the Latin language itself. And some of it is community. I think that people are finding community here. We hear anecdotally that a lot of people who attend traditional Latin Mass are part of large families, many children, like the old Catholic families. And the last is, I think, political. To the degree that politics is now everywhere and it's higher in the hierarchy of our identity, if you believe that Francis has moved the church too much to the left, and that by being more inclusive on, say, accepting divorcees, accepting gay marriage to the extent that he has, I don't want to go too far.
Very limited, yes.
That these are among the things that have hurt the American family and hurt American community, you might respond by going to the Mass that existed before Francis, the Mass that connects to the majesty of the church over centuries, the more conservative, the more rigid and hierarchical Mass. And I don't see why that is going to fade with the movement from Francis to the next pope.
And yet it wasn't that long ago that Benedict, the Pope, was conservative and was a kind of reaction to Pope John Paul II and those who succeeded thereafter.
That's right, yeah.
So the Catholic Church has been sort of sturdy and on the conservative side of things in American religion, not as conservative as evangelical American Christianity, but still very traditional and sort of hidebound. So even that, in that sense, Francis is unique, but it's not as if he ran around the world with a tambourine and the like.
Major, let me give you just one number. Catholic University here in Washington did a study, fascinating, 3,500 priests, and they found an amazing generational change among priests. Among those who've been ordained since 2020, the most recently ordained, more than 80% call themselves conservative, theologically conservative, and in politics lean conservative. They found 0 priests in their study ordained since 2020 who were very progressive.
That is a great fact and a great ender. Aaron Zitner, thank you very much for coming in. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, the Daily Report. Coming up next, CBS News 24/7.